You need to get out of that seat. Ma'am, first class is for actual passengers, not for the help. Those words hit harder than turbulence. They rang out through the quiet. Polished first-class cabin of Atlantic West Flight 298 from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., silencing the rustle of newspapers and the gentle clinking of glassware. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes turned, some curious, others smug, a few pretending not to see. But every soul in that cabin had heard the line. The woman being humiliated wasn't loud. She wasn't disruptive. She hadn't done a thing wrong. She simply existed, calmly, respectfully, in seat 2A, and yet here she was, being spoken to like a stowaway. Before we get into this unforgettable story, where are you watching from? Drop your city below, and if stories about power, pride, and hard lessons speak to you, hit like and subscribe to keep these voices alive. Now, back to what happened in seat 2A. Her name was Danielle Carter, 43 years old, poised, polished, proud. She wasn't trying to make a statement. This was a simple anniversary trip, just her and her husband, Elliot. A weekend in D.C., a hotel they loved near DuPont Circle, maybe dinner at the jazz spot where they first met. The first-class ticket had been a gift. Elliot had booked it himself. Danielle had dressed with understated care. Camel coat, black slacks, leather flats, no flash. Her hair was swept back, her makeup light. She looked like someone with purpose. Not that she needed to prove anything to anyone, but the moment she stepped into the cabin, something changed. She felt it in the silence, in the way a few passengers' eyes lingered just a beat too long, in the way the air seemed to shift around her like it didn't quite know what to do. And then came Nancy Whitaker. The flight attendant with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes as sharp as glass, and a name tag that glinted like it had judged 10,000 passengers before her. Nancy didn't greet her, didn't offer assistance, didn't smile. She looked at Danielle like she'd spilled coffee on a white couch. "Excuse me," she said flatly. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Danielle, seated now. Seatbelt buckled, blinked. She calmly reached into her coat, pulled out the neatly folded boarding pass, and handed it over. No fuss, no attitude, just quiet cooperation. Nancy studied the ticket longer than necessary, lips pursed, eyes narrowing. The name read D. Carter, seat 2A, a perfect match. But it wasn't the name she questioned, it was the woman behind it. And then, without a hint of hesitation, Nancy delivered the line that would change the course of the day. "First class is for actual passengers, not for the help." Danielle's breath caught, but she didn't flinch. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to put her in a place she didn't belong, and it wouldn't be the last. The worst part wasn't the words, it was the volume. Nancy had wanted others to hear. She wanted an audience. Danielle could feel the heat of embarrassment rise in her chest, but she fought it down like a woman who's had to do so her whole life. She didn't lash out. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she reached slowly into her bag, pulled out her phone, and scrolled to the one name that mattered. She hit call. The phone rang once, twice. Then a warm voice answered, calm, familiar, grounding. "Hey, babe," said Elliot Carter, her husband, CEO of Atlas Jet Freight, multimillionaire, quiet, powerful, and fiercely protective of the woman now gripping her phone like a lifeline. Danielle didn't waste time. "Elliot," she said, her voice low and even. "I'm on the plane. A flight attendant just told me to get out of my seat. She said first class isn't for the help." There was a pause. Long, cold, silent. Then his voice changed. "Put her on the phone." Danielle looked up at Nancy, who was still standing there, waiting for a reaction. "My husband would like to speak with you," she said. Holding out the phone, Nancy hesitated. She didn't like losing control. Her eyes flicked to the phone, then back to Danielle's face. A calculation. "I don't need to talk to—" "You might want to," Danielle interrupted, her tone still calm. "Before this becomes something far more expensive than a mistake." Nancy reached for the phone with visible reluctance, not yet realizing that she had just stepped into something far bigger than a misjudged passenger. As Danielle sat back in her seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heartbeat was steady now. Not because she wasn't angry. She was. But because she had done exactly what Elliot always taught her to do. Don't shout. Don't beg. Just pick up the phone. Let power speak in the language they understand. And in that moment, Danielle Carter wasn't just a woman in 2A. She was about to become the reason the flight never left the ground. Nancy Whitaker handed the phone back to Danielle with a tight jaw and eyes that no longer held the smugness of a few minutes ago. Whatever had been said on that call, it had pierced the armor she'd wrapped herself in for decades of flights and power trips. But instead of retreating, she doubled down, the way some people do when they realize they've just made the worst kind of mistake. She muttered something about verifying with the gate agent and walked briskly to the front galley. Danielle could feel the eyes again. Not as many this time, but still there, still lingering. She sat upright, shoulders square, hands folded over her handbag like she was anchoring herself to the seat. Her phone buzzed quietly in her lap. A message from Elliot. "Stay calm. Someone's coming." She didn't know what he meant by that, but she trusted him. She always had. He wasn't just a husband. He was the kind of man who kept promises, especially when someone hurt his family. Just then, the cockpit door cracked open. Nancy re-emerged with a walkie clipped to her hip and a new figure trailing behind her. A uniformed officer, medium build, late 40s, salt and pepper mustache, and a visible chip on his shoulder. His name tag read, Officer Brad Milton, and the moment he stepped into the cabin, the energy shifted. It was subtle, but immediate. Passengers straightened. Flight attendants stepped aside, and Danielle felt that now familiar weight pressed down again. Not guilt, not fear, just exhaustion. She'd been here before. She knew this script. "Ma'am," Officer Milton said, voice low but authoritative. "We've had a report of a seating discrepancy. I need to ask you to come with me and verify your boarding pass at the gate." Danielle didn't move. "There is no discrepancy," she replied evenly. "My boarding pass says seat 2A. I scanned it at the gate. You can check your system." Milton's eyes flicked to Nancy, who offered a shrug that pretended to be helpful. "We just want to clarify. Ma'am." He pressed. "Please don't make this more difficult than it has to be." That word again. Difficult. Danielle took a long, deep breath and pulled her boarding pass from her coat pocket with steady hands. She held it up to him like a courtroom exhibit. "Here," she said. "Take a look." Milton didn't. He stared at her a beat too long, then finally took the paper, glanced at it, then handed it back without comment. "Still, we'll need to talk outside." His tone wasn't violent. Not yet. But it was firm. Final. Like a warning bell. From across the aisle, a voice rang out. She already showed her pass. It was an older woman, Hispanic, maybe late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that burned with quiet fire. She didn't do anything wrong. Why is she the one being asked to leave? Milton ignored her, but another voice followed. This time, deep and measured. "Officer, I watched the entire interaction," said a man in a charcoal suit seated in 2B. "I'm Dr. Samuel Green. I'm a physician, and also a former federal medical examiner. That woman," he gestured to Danielle, "has shown nothing but composure. What's happening here isn't a misunderstanding. It's targeting." Milton's mouth twitched. He looked back at Danielle, then at Nancy, then back to Danielle. His stance hardened. "You need to comply with instructions from a uniformed officer," he said louder now. "Refusal can result in removal or arrest. Do you understand?" The word arrest cracked the stillness of the cabin like a whip. Danielle's pulse spiked, but her expression didn't change. She was angry now, not the kind of anger that explodes, but the quiet, exhausted kind that sits deep in the chest. "You're threatening to arrest me for sitting in the seat I paid for?" Her voice never rose, but there was a tremble in it. Not weakness, but restraint. Milton didn't answer. He shifted his weight and reached for the handcuffs clipped to his belt, not drawing them, but letting the gesture hang in the air like smoke. That was when Dr. Green stood up. "This is harassment," he said plainly. "If you touch her, I will testify on her behalf. And I'm not the only one," the older woman across the aisle, now visibly angry, added. "This is racial profiling, plain and simple. I've seen it too many times. It's shameful." The murmurs in the cabin began to grow, some in support, others muttering to stay out of it. But the line had been crossed. And then, as if the universe couldn't bear another second of silence, Danielle's phone buzzed again. She looked down. Another message from Elliot. "Tell him to check with the pilot, now." She lifted her eyes. "Officer Milton," she said quietly. "My husband is speaking with your airline's legal counsel and the pilot right now. I suggest you confirm with the captain before this goes further." Milton laughed, a short, dismissive puff of sound. "Your husband?" he scoffed. "And who exactly is he supposed to be?" Danielle answered without blinking. "Elliot Carter, CEO of Atlas Jet Freight, your airline's largest cargo client." Milton blinked. His face didn't move, but something behind his eyes shifted. "Call the captain," she added. "Now." And for the first time in that narrow aisle, the officer hesitated. Not because he believed her, but because he realized he might have just walked straight into a fight he wasn't equipped to win. Officer Brad Milton stared at Danielle for a long moment, his posture frozen, the authority he carried beginning to unravel beneath the weight of the name she'd just spoken. Elliot Carter. That wasn't a name tossed around lightly in aviation circles. Milton wasn't a business guy, but even he'd heard whispers. Freight mogul, multi-million-dollar shipping contracts, tight with federal transportation regulators. For a moment, everything was still. Then Nancy stepped in again, her voice laced with a brittle defiance. "This isn't about her husband," she snapped. "This is about protocol." But Milton wasn't listening to her anymore. His fingers went to the walkie clipped to his chest, and he pressed it slowly, his voice lower now. "Requesting confirmation. Is the captain aware of a situation involving a passenger in seat 2A? Name Danielle Carter?" There was a crackle of static. Then a clipped voice responded. "Affirmative. Captain Ellis is currently speaking with someone from corporate regarding that name. Stand by." Milton's face didn't change, but the shift in the cabin was palpable. Every passenger knew something had just shifted, like the train tracks of fate had jumped to a different course. Danielle sat quietly, still dignified, her hands gently clasped in her lap, but her heart was racing. She hadn't even spoken to Elliot since handing Nancy the phone. She didn't know what he'd said, or who he'd called, but she knew him. And when he moved decisively. Back in Washington, D.C., in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Potomac, Elliot Carter was anything but calm. His phone, now on speaker, rested beside his laptop as he spoke in clipped, deliberate tones with two parties, the airline's legal counsel and Captain Ron Ellis himself, who had been patched in from the cockpit. "Let me make this plain," Elliot said, his voice razor-sharp. "My wife is being threatened with removal and possible arrest for sitting in the seat I purchased for her, under her name, With a confirmed first-class boarding pass. That seat is in your system. You scanned her in. Your employee escalated the situation based on an assumption about her appearance. And now you have a Port Authority officer being used as muscle for a lie. There was a beat of silence. The airline's general counsel, a man named Marcus Levitt, cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, we deeply apologize for— I'm not interested in apologies, Elliot interrupted. I'm interested in action. If she is touched, if she is removed, if she is further harassed, not only will you lose the $120 million contract Atlas Jet holds with your freight division, but I will personally see to it that this incident becomes a case study in every aviation law seminar for the next decade. Are we clear? Captain Ellis, a seasoned pilot with over 30 years of flight experience, finally spoke. Mr. Carter, I assure you, I was not aware of the full extent of this incident. I will handle it. Good, Elliot replied, calm again. Then let me speak with the officer now. The pilot hesitated. He's just outside the cockpit. One moment. Back in the cabin. Officer Milton's radio buzzed again. Officer Milton, this is Captain Ellis. Please report to the flight deck immediately. There was no room for argument. Milton turned stiffly and walked down the narrow aisle toward the front. As he passed Danielle, he didn't say a word, just a glance, not hostile anymore, but cautious, like a man realizing the ground beneath him might not be as solid as he thought. He disappeared into the cockpit, the door shut, and for several minutes, there was only silence. Danielle remained seated. The older woman across the aisle gave her a soft, encouraging nod. Dr. Green, still standing, looked like he was holding back 1,000 thoughts. Then the cockpit door opened, and Captain Ellis stepped out, tall, silver-haired, with a calm that had clearly seen turbulence both literal and human. He looked directly at Danielle, then addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying the authority that only years in command could produce. Due to a serious internal matter, Atlantic West Flight 298 is now officially canceled. We apologize for the inconvenience. Please gather your belongings and prepare to deplane. Gate agents will assist you shortly. The words hit like thunder. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Passengers jolted in their seats. Canceled? One man barked. What for? We're already boarded. This is outrageous, someone else cried. But the captain didn't waver. He turned to Nancy. You are relieved of your duties for this flight. Report to the back galley. Do not interact with any more passengers. Her face drained of color. Sir, not another word, he said, low but final. Nancy stumbled backward down the aisle. A few passengers pulled out their phones. One had clearly already started recording. The hashtag was probably already out there. Danielle remained still, breath shallow, hands trembling slightly now. Not because she was scared, but because everything she had held in for the last 20 minutes was finally beginning to surface. She hadn't asked for this. She didn't want a spectacle. She just wanted a seat next to a window, on a flight to D.C., to spend a weekend with her husband. But instead, she had become a lightning rod for something bigger, something uglier, and now, something irreversible. As passengers began gathering their bags in frustration, some still shooting dirty looks her way, others casting glances of quiet apology, Danielle sat quietly, waiting. She wasn't going to leave until she was told, until someone came to her directly. And when Captain Ellis approached again, kneeling slightly beside her seat, she finally exhaled. Mrs. Carter, he said softly, I want to offer you my personal apology. This situation never should have happened. A representative from the airline will meet you at the gate with further arrangements. Danielle gave him a slow nod. Thank you, Captain, she said, her voice firm but gracious. But I'm not the one who should be embarrassed here. He paused, then nodded once in understanding before rising and moving on. The plane emptied slowly, like a leaking vessel, a mix of confusion, tension, and unresolved anger flowing down the aisle. But Danielle sat quietly, clutching her phone, watching it all pass by. The damage was done, but so was the silence. And now, the reckoning had begun. As the last frustrated passenger stepped off the aircraft, muttering something about another entitled traveler ruining things for everyone. Danielle Carter remained seated in 2A, calm but far from at ease. Her heart was still racing, but her hands rested quietly in her lap. Phone screen dimmed, the buzz of incoming messages from Elliot ignored for now. All around her, the first-class cabin was a disheveled mess. Half-filled glasses, open overhead bins, blankets left behind in irritation. She hadn't moved, not because she was stubborn, but because something inside her refused to be rushed anymore. For too long. Black women like her had been told to just move along, to not make things harder than they needed to be. But today the lie had unraveled in front of everyone. Outside the cabin, the gate had turned into a scene, gate agents scrambling, passengers forming tight knots of complaints, and a growing presence of airline management gathering at the end of the jet bridge. Among them was a tall man in a dark navy suit with the Atlantic West crest on his badge. His name was Gregory Shaw, Senior Operations Manager for the Western region, and his expression walked the line between panic and PR control. He spotted Danielle the moment she stepped off the plane, escorted by Captain Ellis himself. She hadn't asked for the captain's company, but he'd insisted, an unspoken gesture of respect, or perhaps remorse, the moment her shoes touched the carpet of the terminal. Shaw approached, hand extended, voice low. "Mrs. Carter," he began, "I'm deeply sorry for what's occurred. On behalf of Atlantic West, we—" "Stop," Danielle said, gently but firmly, not taking his hand. "I'm sure you've already heard from my husband." Shaw swallowed. "Yes, ma'am, we have, and we're currently reviewing things internally." Danielle gave him a look that made his voice falter. "Your internal review is already too late." Meanwhile, back in D.C., Elliot Carter wasn't waiting for any review. The moment the flight had been officially canceled, with verified reports from both his wife and the captain, he'd instructed his legal team to send a formal termination notice to Atlantic West's freight division. Atlas Jet Freight had been their largest logistics partner for 5 consecutive years, moving over $120 million annually in air cargo. The termination letter wasn't just a legal formality, it was a warning shot, sent directly to Atlantic West's CEO, Robert Keane. The email landed in his inbox at 5:17 p.m. with the subject line, "Immediate contract cancellation, Atlas Jet Freight." The body of the message pulled no punches. It detailed the racial profiling, the attempted removal of a lawful passenger, and the systemic failure in employee conduct, ending with the line, "We consider this incident a breach of trust, safety, and dignity, effective immediately. Our relationship with Atlantic West ends." Keane, dining at a private golf club outside Atlanta, felt the blood drain from his face when he read it. Within minutes, his phone was blowing up. Legal, PR, and operations all trying to patch the holes in a dam that had already burst. But the corporate fallout was only one part of the collapse. By the time Danielle reached baggage claim, the story had already begun to spread. A passenger from seat 3A had posted a video to TikTok, a short, shaky clip of Officer Milton standing over Danielle, the audio picking up Nancy's voice saying, "This seat isn't for the help." It had already been viewed over 2,000 times and was climbing fast under the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack. Major Twitter accounts had picked it up. Instagram Reels had started using the clip to spotlight racial bias in luxury travel, and news outlets were scrambling to verify the footage. It wasn't just about Danielle anymore. It was about a pattern that people recognized, and the internet was hungry to dissect it. Inside the Port Authority precinct office at SFO, Officer Brad Milton was watching his own name trend. A supervisor had pulled him aside 30 minutes after the flight was canceled and told him to prepare a written incident report. But before he could finish the second paragraph, Internal Affairs walked in, the chief himself. A tired man with too many political fires to put out, told Milton he was being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Milton tried to defend himself, claiming he'd followed procedure, but when they asked for his body cam footage, the conversation shifted. "You never checked the manifest?" the investigator asked. "She showed you her boarding pass and ID, on video, and you still escalated?" Milton didn't have an answer. His partner, who had stood by during the incident and said nothing, was also placed on leave. The department knew what was coming: lawsuits, public pressure, possibly a civil rights complaint. Back at Atlantic West HQ, the fire was already raging. Nancy Whitaker had been pulled from the tarmac by security and led into a private conference room, where she now sat pale and shaking across from 2 HR officials and a union rep. The tone was cold and businesslike. "We've reviewed preliminary evidence," the HR manager said. "You made multiple unsubstantiated claims, escalated without proper cause, and used language that violates both our discrimination and dignity policy." Nancy tried to defend herself. She didn't look like. "Stop," the rep said, raising a hand. "There is no justification for what you said, and it's on video." Her termination was swift, effective immediately. Atlantic West made it clear they would not support any attempt for re-employment in the industry and would contest any unemployment benefits on the grounds of gross misconduct. Nancy didn't speak. She simply gathered her bag and walked out of the building for the last time. And while social media roared, and lawyers drafted, and executives spun in emergency boardrooms, Danielle sat quietly in the back seat of a black sedan her husband had sent to pick her up. The driver said little, offering her bottled water and a quiet ride to the St. Regis, where a suite had already been prepared. She hadn't cried. Not once, but now, staring out at the city as it passed by in a blur of lights and glass, she felt something swell in her chest, not pain, not pride, but the weight of knowing the truth had finally been heard. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't lashed out. She had simply sat still in the storm and let the system collapse under its own rotten weight. By the next morning, the story wasn't just local, it was everywhere. From CNN and MSNBC to morning radio segments and civil rights blogs, the video clip of Danielle Carter being humiliated in seat 2A had become a national conversation. Her name was trending not because she sought attention, but because her silence, her composure, and her refusal to be quietly ushered out spoke volumes. The footage, under hashtags like hashtag flying while black, hashtag seat 2A, and hashtag respect isn't luxury, had ignited something visceral. Social media users dissected every frame: Nancy's tone, Officer Milton's posture, the fact that Danielle never raised her voice, never once stood up, yet had been targeted and threatened with arrest. But behind the screen noise, something much heavier was moving, something far more permanent. Elliot Carter had already mobilized his legal team from Harper & Rhodes LLP, a formidable D.C.-based firm known for federal contract litigation and civil rights actions. By 8:30 a.m., they had filed a notice of intent to sue with the Port Authority of San Francisco International Airport and with Atlantic West Airlines. The filing named Officer Brad Milton personally, citing violations under Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act, alleging unlawful detention, abuse of authority, and racial profiling. The suit against Atlantic West named negligent training, hostile service environment, and violation of federal aviation non-discrimination regulations. Attached to the brief was not only the viral video, but sworn witness statements from Dr. Samuel Green, who had sat beside Danielle, and Linda Martinez, the retired school teacher who had spoken up from across the aisle. Both had voluntarily come forward through Atlas Jet's legal hotline the night before, offering to testify. Their statements were powerful, uncoached, and rooted in simple truth. She was calm, Linda wrote. They made her a target before she even opened her mouth. I've seen this before, and I've stayed quiet before. Not anymore. That same morning, Atlantic West's stock opened down 7%. Analysts began whispering about the loss of the Atlas Jet freight contract, $120 million annually, not counting renewal extensions. Investors demanded answers. CEO Robert Keane, now in full crisis mode, had already convened an emergency board meeting inside the high-glass conference room on the 19th floor of their Chicago headquarters. The mood was grim. PowerPoints were irrelevant. The numbers said it all. A contract gone, a national PR scandal unfolding, a lawsuit threatening to pierce the veil of corporate immunity. But more than that, Keane knew that Elliot Carter wasn't bluffing. He wasn't some enraged customer looking for a voucher. He was a boardroom shark who knew how to dismantle companies with a phone call and a folder. Publicly. The airline issued a carefully worded statement. Atlantic West is deeply saddened by the events that occurred on Flight 298. We are investigating this matter thoroughly and take all claims of discrimination seriously. But it wasn't enough. Not for the public. And certainly not for Danielle. Behind closed doors. Elliot had made it clear. A donation wouldn't buy silence, and a PR cleanup wouldn't reverse the damage. What was needed now wasn't spin. It was reckoning, within 48 hours. Atlantic West had fired Nancy Whitaker, the termination letter citing egregious violation of company values and federal conduct codes. The flight attendants' union offered minimal resistance. Once the video had circulated, defending her would have meant suicide by association. Nancy, blindsided, claimed she was being scapegoated, but not even her former colleagues came to her defense. Quietly, she was added to the do not rehire list across multiple airline HR networks, her 30-year career reduced to a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Officer Milton's life was also unraveling. Port Authority Internal Affairs had pulled his body cam footage, and it had confirmed everything the passengers claimed, that he never verified Danielle's ID in the system, that he used the phrase "you people" during his exchange with her, and that he reached for his handcuffs before attempting any meaningful dialogue. The footage was damning, and the media got wind of it, with public pressure mounting and the lawsuit on the front page of several national outlets. The department had no choice. Milton was suspended indefinitely without pay, stripped of badge and gun, pending termination hearings. His union rep could barely muster a defense. A legal analyst on television put it bluntly. He turned a misunderstanding into a federal civil rights case, on camera. As for Danielle and Elliot, they stayed quiet in public, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Elliot knew the media frenzy would pass, but the legacy of what happened needed to be more than headlines. In private. The couple began working with a group of civil rights attorneys and organizational consultants to launch a new nonprofit, the 2A Foundation. Named after the seat Danielle had rightfully occupied and symbolically defended. Its mission was twofold: to provide free legal support to travelers facing discrimination, and to offer leadership and resilience training for young women of color entering public spaces traditionally closed to them. "We're not here to cancel airlines," Danielle told the founding team. "We're here to remind them that belonging isn't earned through appearance, it's affirmed through rights." 1 week after the incident, Danielle finally gave a single interview, not to a major network, but to NPR's All Things Considered, where she shared her side of the story with quiet clarity. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I just sat still and let the truth rise around me. The scary part is how easily it could have gone differently. Her voice cracked only once. When talking about a text Elliot had sent her right after the flight was canceled, it simply read, "You didn't flinch, you didn't bend, you stood still, and the world moved." By the end of that week, Danielle Carter wasn't just a trending name. She was a symbol, not of conflict, but of calm resistance in the face of casual cruelty. Her lawsuit was proceeding. Her foundation was preparing to launch. And behind her was a wave of voices, lawyers, teachers, business leaders, and strangers, all saying what they should have said long ago. She belonged there. She always did. The following month unfolded like a quiet storm, not dramatic or loud, but sweeping and irreversible. While headlines moved on to other news, and social media turned its attention elsewhere, Danielle Carter and her husband, Elliot, were deep in the work of something lasting. What began as a painful moment in a luxury airplane seat had now taken form as a living mission. The 2A Foundation, named not out of nostalgia, but out of reclamation. Seat 2A. Where Danielle was shamed, was now a symbol of presence, of endurance, of earned space. The foundation launched quietly at first. A modest press release, a clean website, a mission that was straightforward. Provide legal aid to individuals who face discrimination while traveling, and fund leadership scholarships for young Black women entering law, public policy, or transportation. Danielle didn't want noise. She wanted impact, and that impact began to ripple faster than even she expected. Within weeks, applications poured in, not for scholarships alone, but for testimonies. Women from all over the country wrote in, a mother removed from a business lounge in Denver, a Ph.D. student told she was in the wrong section of the train, a nurse forced to re-verify her ticket 3 times on a cross-country bus. Danielle read every letter. Some she cried through. Some made her angry. But mostly, they made her resolute. She wasn't alone. She never had been. Elliot, meanwhile, had shifted gears from damage control to legacy building. He tapped industry contacts, brought in consultants, and formed strategic alliances between 2A and national civil rights groups. He didn't want the foundation to simply react to injustice. He wanted it to prevent it. One of his first calls was to Dr. Samuel Green, the physician who had stood up beside Danielle on Flight 298. Green, now retired from his hospital post, eagerly joined the board. That day on the plane, he said, I kept thinking, what if I'd said nothing? What if I'd just stayed seated, watching this grow? It's my chance to be better than that moment. Linda Martinez, the retired school teacher who had spoken out from across the aisle, also joined the advisory committee. She told Danielle over coffee, I've got time, and I've got fire. Use both. Danielle smiled softly. That was her favorite kind of ally. Quiet, steady, and unwavering. The first major fundraising gala for 2A took place 8 weeks later, in a candlelit ballroom at the Hamilton Hotel in D.C., with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a crisp spring evening and the soft glow of the city below. There were no flashy celebrities, no tabloid photographers, just donors, allies, advocates, and survivors. Danielle stood near the stage in a navy evening gown, simple but commanding. Her shoulders held back with the kind of quiet dignity she'd had all along. Elliot was at her side, his hand resting gently on her back. He wasn't the star tonight. She was. The room settled as she took the microphone, and for the first time since the flight, Danielle spoke publicly, not to defend herself, but to claim the power that had always been hers. 8 weeks ago, she began, her voice calm. I was told I didn't belong in a seat I had every right to occupy. I didn't yell. I didn't demand. I just stayed still. I let the facts speak. I let the silence reveal the truth. But silence alone isn't enough. Not anymore. She paused, her eyes scanning the room, not for effect, but for connection. 2A is not about one flight. It's about every time someone is made to feel they're only allowed somewhere by mistake. It's about the little wounds we carry, the ones we bandage over with silence and strength and smiles. But tonight, we stop bandaging. We start building. The applause was quiet at first, then thunderous. Not because she had delivered a speech meant to inspire, but because she had delivered a truth too many had lived. After the program ended, Danielle stepped aside as dozens came to thank her. Among them was a young woman named Kendra, a first-year law student from Baltimore who had received 2A's first official scholarship. She hugged Danielle tightly, whispering, "I promise I'll earn this. For all of us." Danielle smiled, her throat tight. "You already have," she replied. Later that night, back in their hotel suite, Danielle stood barefoot on the balcony, looking out over the city. Elliot joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. "You were brilliant," he whispered. She didn't say anything right away. She was still thinking about the woman she had been 8 weeks ago, alone in seat 2A, accused of trespassing into a space she had paid to enter. "I still feel it," she finally said. "The way it felt when they looked at me like I didn't belong." Elliot kissed her temple. "Let them keep their looks," he said softly. "You built something better." And she had. Not just a foundation, not just a movement, but a shift, subtle, real, and deeply human. A full year drifted by after Flight 298, and the hard edges of that afternoon at SFO smoothed into memory. Yet the ripple it set loose never really stopped. It simply widened until it touched places Danielle Carter never imagined. Courtrooms, classrooms, and quiet corners of people's hearts who had watched the video and whispered, "That could have been me." In early spring, exactly 12 months to the day, Danielle found herself standing in the modest gymnasium of Dunbar High School in Southeast D.C., invited to speak for Career Day. The bleachers were packed with teenagers in hoodies and sneakers, teachers holding clipboards, and a sprinkling of parents who had taken off work, all eager to hear from the lady who turned a bad flight into a good fight. She wore a simple charcoal blazer and flats, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed CEO's wife, because she wanted the kids to see a person, not a headline, and when she looked up at the faded school banner over the basketball hoop, she thought about the banner inside her own mind that still read, "Seat 2A, keep your dignity buckled," she began. "I'm not here to give you a fairy tale," her voice steady through the squeak of sneakers and the buzz of the old PA system. "I'm here to tell you what happens after someone tries to shrink you down to the size they're comfortable with." She told them about Nancy's words. No cursing, no extra drama, just the plain facts. And she told them how she had stayed seated, how Dr. Samuel Green and Ms. Linda Martinez had stood up, and how the world had watched because a phone lens happened to be pointed in the right direction. "But," she added, "the real story started after the plane emptied, when my husband and I had to decide if we would spend our energy on revenge or on repair." Heads nodded. A few students leaned forward, eyes bright. One boy in the front row whispered, "That's what my mom says. Use what hurts to help." Danielle smiled at him, heart pinching a little, because that was exactly the new rule she and Elliot had written on their kitchen chalkboard the night the lawsuits were filed. Pain is only tuition if you turn it into a lesson. She spoke of the 2A Foundation's first legal victory, helping a hair braider from Memphis win a settlement after she'd been dragged off a regional jet for improper attire, and of the scholarship fund that now carried Kendra, their first recipient. Through her second semester of law school, she described quiet successes, like the transportation companies that had adopted 2A's dignity training program, 8 so far, with 3 more in negotiation. And she didn't spare the hard truths either, sharing the hate mail that still landed in her inbox, or the sleepless nights when she wondered if the next incident would be worse, filmed or not. She paused, letting the room breathe, then asked the students to close their eyes. Picture the place you dream of sitting. Maybe it's a boardroom, a science lab, or the front pew at your own graduation. Now picture someone telling you that seat isn't for people like you. What do? When they opened their eyes again, she gave them the lesson she wished she'd learned earlier. You anchor yourself. You take one deep breath. Keep your dignity on display. And you let silence ask the question your voice shouldn't have to. The gym was hushed. Even the teachers looked moved. Then, in the back row, a familiar silver-haired man slowly rose. Dr. Green, who had arranged the visit. His deep baritone filled the space as he said, "I stood once, today. You all can stand earlier and taller because Mrs. Carter showed us how." Applause thundered, and Danielle felt her throat tighten with that blend of gratitude and ache that visits survivors when their private scar becomes a public torch. Later, under softer lights at the 2A office, she opened a plain envelope postmarked Trenton. Inside, a letter from former Officer Brad Milton, written in careful block handwriting that confessed, without excuses, how a year of therapy and unemployment had finally peeled back the prejudice he once called procedure. "I know this apology will not undo the fear I put in your eyes," he wrote, "but I am learning that real authority starts with seeing the human in front of you." Danielle read it twice, folded it, and placed it in a file labeled Accountability, neither forgiven nor ignored, just documented. Because healing isn't tidy, it's archived. Nancy Whitaker's name surfaced in a local paper a month earlier. She'd taken a midnight custodial job at a chain grocery in Phoenix after every airline door closed. The article quoted her blaming political correctness. But Danielle felt only a muted sadness. Some people plant seeds even in rocky soil. Others carry rocks around and wonder why nothing grows. That evening, the 2A board gathered in a rented church hall, white folding chairs, budget coffee, and a podium borrowed from the Sunday choir, to approve the Foundation's first national partnership, a pro bono travel rights hotline staffed by volunteer attorneys. Linda Martinez, reading the motion, wiped a tear as she remembered her own silence in past decades. "I spent 30 years telling kids to speak up, but it took Danielle to teach me what that sounds like at 35,000 feet. The motion passed unanimously, and as everyone filed out into the cool night, Elliot squeezed Danielle's hand. "You realize," he whispered, "we just turned seat numbers into lifelines." She laughed, low and warm, the laugh that had made him fall in love back in a college jazz club. "We?" she teased. "You turned contracts into consequences. I'm just the lady who wouldn't get up." They both knew it was more than that, but humility had become her favorite armor. Driving home, they passed a billboard flickering in the dusk, an airline advertisement featuring a smiling black flight attendant above the slogan, "Every seat deserves respect." Elliot chuckled. Wonder who they're quoting. Danielle didn't answer. She was thinking about the students at Dunbar, the nurse from the bus, the hair braider from Memphis, and about the fact that legacy isn't a plaque or a viral clip. It's a chain of ordinary people who decide the next link won't break. In the rearview mirror, the city lights blurred like a runway at takeoff, and she realized that the hardest part of her journey wasn't that a stranger tried to steal her seat. It was that for one heartbeat, she had almost believed she might lose it, but she hadn't. And that, she decided, was the life lesson worth passing on. Dignity is a non-transferable ticket. Once you claim it, no one can downgrade you without your permission. She whispered the line aloud, testing its weight. Elliot reached over, turned down the jazz on the radio, and asked her to repeat it so he could remember exactly tomorrow. She'd type it up and pin it on the 2A office wall, right beside a framed photo of seat 2A itself. Empty, bathed in morning light. Proof that an unclaimed space can become a doorway. That a moment of quiet defiance can echo louder than any shout. And that sometimes the surest way to change the flight path of a system is simply to stay seated until the world adjusts its altitude around you. Thanks for watching. If Danielle's story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Sometimes, the quietest stand changes everything.